Hello, I'm going to give answer to the following questions from the chapter 15 to 17. For the first question, I'm going to talk about my point of view as an engineer, and I'm going to give some tools that I consider that are very useful to identify some problems into a company. For the first one, we have the diagram of cause and effect. I consider that is a tool that helps us a lot. Initially, because we find here is 6 M's, and these 6 M's are two related to each process. In each process, we find that each one of these 6 M's is quite related, and with this relation for these different words to the process, we can find many of the difficulties that this process have, as is the raw material isn't good, the equipment, the people who do this work, the environment, and other different aspects. For the second one, I am going to talk about the DOFA diagram. This is a diagram that helps us to have a better vision of the problem. So we have a better option to identify these opportunities, weakness, and different other aspects, so we can analyze the situation of the aspect, the process, and see which points are stronger to us or which points are weaker and we have to work on them. And finally, I'm going to talk about the Kaizen. This is a tool, maybe, that we can use to uh, as a group, uh, recollect more ideas of the process. Sometimes we don't take into account the people who is more related to the process and who hasn't the same knowledge that us, but these people know better the process, the machines. So when we make a meeting with all of these people, we can get the knowledge that they have of the process and make a train of ideas, so we can get more knowledge of the process and make some aspects that may could help a lot the process. For the second point or the second question, I'm going to talk about what is a bottleneck and to give 3 examples of this. A bottleneck is when into a process there is one of the steps or one of these parts of the process takes more time than the others, making that when the process is something linear, the rest of the process are going to take longer time because of this process. So the product will take more time to be ready. For the first example, we have a company and it has four different enterprise or different companies that give them material. So here we find that 3 of these companies give the materials in a time of 1 day, but the last one company gives this material in a time of 2 or 3 days. It depends on the depending on different aspects. So here we find a bottleneck in the company. This because they have the other 3 parts of the process in a faster time than the fourth one. That is the ones who give it in a longer time. So the process will be slow because of this. For the second example, we find the lab in the university where we had worked many times. We find that there is a linear process where we have 3 different boxes with balls of different colors to a space of control check, one where the different boxes are closed, and finally when they are uh, when these boxes are given to the company that is buying it. Here we find that when a process takes longer, for example, when the third color needs more time because it's filling the box with a bigger quantity than the others, here we have a bottleneck. This is because the process is taking longer time. Sometimes we find that the bottlenecks are not something, it doesn't mean that there is a problem in the process. Sometimes we find that there are processes that take a specific a quantity of time. So sometimes we can't reduce this time, but there are many situations where we can do this, or we can, for example, put another line of this process to accelerate it. And finally, for the last example, during a lab the last week, we were making some equipment with different uh, parts. Here we find that the process has three parts, two parts that were not linear, and two parts that depend on of the other parts. For the third part, we found that depends of the parts of the second process, and for the fourth part, we found that it depends on the process of the first part and the third part. When some of the students take longer doing this equipment, we found that the last process is seem affected by this. So if, for example, the second process take longer, it will create a bottleneck, making that the third process take longer and that the fourth process take longer. For the third question, I consider that the better way to don't have like this dispersion into the process is first to get a better communication in each process. For example, if it is a manual process, to get a better communication between one step or one department and the other. It is possible to see that when most of the people that is related to the process have a better communication, they work in a very big, a very good way. But if we find that there is a bad communication, that there is no communication between these parts, they won't have a good process. They won't have like that connection to get a better production. By the other part, it is useful. It is up to use some tools like process diagram to know better the time, the process, if there is something wrong or maybe a little problem in one of them. So when you solve or when we solve these problems, the dispersion of the process will reduce. Another and finally, the last recommendation is to use the quality control. The better would be to don't have a lot of this because it will mean a higher cost and time that the process required to be checking in a constant way. So the better for this is like to situate two quality controls in parts that are very important to the process and to capacitate the people so they will have better capacities to know if the process is having a problem and to check it after it before it gets to the last part of the process. For the fourth question, I don't consider that to use this security margin into the just-in-time is good. This because we find that the just-in-time principal objective is to reduce the inventory. They look to use the smallest capacity of inventory required, taking just what is necessary. But taking this security margin, we found that to have these materials in a specific point, even if it is in a temporal way, it will be against the ideology or the ideas that the just-in-time is giving to us. For the fifth question, I'm going to talk about the buffers and give some examples of this. First, what is a buffer? A buffer is when the company take like a preventive situation to have, for example, a solution to different problems that could be present in the productive process. For the first example, I'm going to talk about when a company buy a higher quantity of material. This buffer means that, for example, if the company wants to prevent the risk of a material that doesn't get to the company for different situations, they will have this extra inventory and they will be able to use it to the production. For the second example, I'm going to talk about an extra production. This is similar to the last one. Here we find that, for example, the company produced more than what was necessary or what was demanded Maybe because they like to prevent, for example, if it will be a higher demand, they will have this extra production to supply this extra demand. But this isn't as good as it sounds because, as we have seen in these two buffers, it depends a lot of the external aspects of the company. So the variation is higher. Maybe if there is a risk, they will have a solution, but maybe if there is not a risk, they are increasing the cost and in making an inversion in things that aren't as necessary as it could be. And for the final example, we have the contract of extra people as to the productive process. Here we find that it, as the last one, it depends on the demand of the product. Maybe if a company contract a lot of people because they think that it will be a higher production, there isn't, they will have an increase in the cost and a lot of people that isn't working in a full way. But if there is a higher demand, they will be prepared for this, so they will have a better production. But it depends on a lot of things. For the sixth question, I consider that to apply a buffer, as we see, we have three different models. The first one without the buffers, the second one, and the third one that each one has a buffer. I consider that to apply a buffer has as good points as bad points because of it depends on a lot of different aspects. So this variation is very people doesn't know what is going to happen during the time with the demand, with the process, and with different aspects that will affect this. So sometimes it's good to have these buffers, and sometimes it's something that represent a higher cost, but we find that if it helps to the process to finish in the correct time and in the time that was expected, it could be quite helpful. For this the eighth question, I suggest to use a process similar to the PHBA process, which will be to first identify where is the problem and what is causing this problem. For the second one, to analyze the situation, to make a plan, something to follow to solve this problem, and finally to apply this solution. Then look again if the problem has been solved or if there is something else to look at this. For the ninth question, first I'm going to talk about the resources buffer. As I have said in the first part of the video, a resource buffer is something like when the company buy extra material for maybe don't have any problem in the future because of the people who give this material. If they have a problem with the buffer resource, they will be able to have this material without any problem. For the project buffer, we find that it is a buffer that give more time to the project when maybe the time that was given in the first time isn't as isn't the ones that they need. Maybe they need more for different aspects. And finally, the buffer of information. Here we find that this buffer means is that the project will have more time or more material. This taking into account the information that they had received for maybe a check of the project. When they check the project, they found that there is missing some material or some time to finish the project, so they make this buffer. Finally, for the 10th question, I'm going to give three questions that I made during the reading of these chapters. First, my first question is if there is a limit of buffers into a project, or, or if they are able to add all the buffers that they want. For the second question is if buffers are able to apply in little project or project that doesn't have the same impact as big projects. For the last question, the is if the human factor is related to the quantity of buffers and the buffers when they add to the project.